So I've got that going. Excellent, excellent.
How cold is it in Boston today?
Yeah, I don't know, mid-40s.
No, that's not so bad.
Chilly,
Please.
but not too bad.
I think there's a deep freeze in the center of the country. I just wasn't sure how far east it went.
What
Do you have
about
snow on the ground? Oh, not if it's 40. Have you gotten snow yet?
We did in October.
In October, wow. Okay.
We got about 4 inches. Yeah, that was particularly our many of our international students were particularly displeased with that.
The one that always gets me is like the April 8th storm. You know, it just seems like insult to injury. Like, isn't this over, please? And then they hit you one more time.
Right. Wow.
Actually, my understanding, UMass Boston is very fancy now. I know it was Keith Yaki or something, spent a lot of money. I mean, Meta and I remember when the ceiling tiles were falling in and the whole place. Now I see these pictures of the campus. I'm like, wow, this place is zingy. This is amazing. And I think they said that like condos in Southie are going for $500,000. That wasn't the case when we were there in the early aughts.
It's quite a different place. It really is. I mean, you remember before they had even painted the cinder block. Probably.
That's right. It was just the raw cinder block. Yeah, that's right.
Yes. And so the first step was painting the cinder block, and now we've got all sorts of new buildings and stuff like that.
Fantastic. That's great. I'm glad to hear it. I need to come back and visit.
The old Bayside Expo where the convention center is, they're redeveloping that space too now.
Really? Wow. Well, I do remember the JFK Museum was always very fancy, but we were always a little bit, I mean, they talked about how a lot of the buildings that UMass Boston was mob construction from the 70s, but I'm glad that they fixed it all up now. That's good to hear.
Yep. There's radical changes going on. There will be actually, by the time we all get back to campus, that whole center concrete plaza, or most of it, will be gone. And
really?
They demolished the garages underneath and brought the whole thing down to ground level. It's supposed to be a big open green quad.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's amazing.
Out to the water. Yeah, it should be pretty cool.
Fantastic.
We'll see.
Yeah, right.
When you see it.
That's right.
Wow. Well, folks are continuing to roll in, so I'm going to give us another minute, but then I'll get us started in honor of and respect for all the folks who are here already. But we have quite a lot of folks showing up. I'm going to invite folks who are on the call already to start just dropping into the chat, maybe your name and either what program you're in, or if you're not, what brings you to us, and we'll just be able to get a quick sense of who's here just by sort of watching what goes by in the chat.
You bet. I'm a big fan of the chat. Sometimes the more interesting presentation is happening in the chat and not in the video session. So.
Yes, indeed. This is also my favorite moment when we've made the invitation to start introducing yourself in the chat, and you're just seeing people typing and nothing is appearing.
This moment of anticipation, right? Exactly. What's going to come?
Right. So we have a couple of our students, Kim and Isabel and Lee Murphy, who is one of our program managers. And I should say we've actually got 3 of our wonderful program staff are here with us today. Lee Murphy and Kelly Ward Mason are our 2 program managers.
Absolutely, I know their names.
Yes, who make everything work, whether it's setting up something like this or getting students admitted or getting students registered for classes and helping them navigate and troubleshoot the kind of trouble that us faculty create. And Charlotte Namby is here, who does a tremendous amount of support of all of the processes that we do. We've got, oh my. So we've got a number of current students. We've got alumni like Chris Karam, who was Chris Brody when she was here, showing up. Karen Ross and Jeff Pugh and David Matz, faculty members, are all here.
Great.
We've got some of our doctoral students, Shino Yokotsuka. I'm never going to say that right, am I, Shino?
You're saying right. Yeah.
I said it. All right.
Yeah.
Yokotsuka. All right, Pretty good, Evan. I'm impressed.
You're impressed. I don't care if you're impressed. If Shino's impressed, then I'm doing good. We've got Iman is one of our Fulbright students is here. We've got a whole bunch of our first year students like Isabel and Ogemdi and Savannah. We've got some of our second year students like Matt McGonigal and Mariam and Augusta. Wonderful, wonderful. Welcome, everybody.
Fantastic. What a great group.
Julia Dyke, another of our alumni from a way back, is here. Oh, terrific, terrific. Welcome, everybody. Keep dropping those in there so that we can all see who's here. I'm going to get us started as we've got 35 people on the call already. There may be a few more. Welcome, everyone, and please join me in welcoming our speaker today, Colin Rule. This is a real treat in a lot of different kinds of ways. I'm going to introduce Colin without referring to any of what's written, so I'll probably miss important things and screw up other things, but I'll have more fun this way. Colin was a student in the program, in the certificate program, back in the late 90s. We think we figured out it was like 98 and 99 that he was taking classes. And at the time, he was like most bright young folks at that time. He had an internet startup company. Only his was about providing online dispute resolution, which sounded like kind of a weird thing at the time. And as I recall, Colin had one client or one main client. And then they eventually sort of took him in-house, him and his platform in-house. And he was executive vice president for dispute resolution for, did I get that right?
That's a promotion, but I'm not going to contradict you because I like being promoted.
There you go, anytime, for eBay and PayPal, and went on to build a system that last I heard, I'm sure it's changed, last I heard was handling something like 60 million conflicts a year. And Colin had worked that out in part by coming up with a, by the way, every one of you just keep in mind that I remember absolutely everything that you ever tell me or say.
So far, so good. I'm really impressed.
And I'll screw it up too. So, but anyway, but he did this in part by building these algorithms that would predict that a conflict was likely and automatically offer solutions to people before they ever got into trouble. And then could offer some sort of machine-assisted negotiation if they needed it, and then if really needed, could bring in a human mediator. This is incredibly creative and was really, really pioneering stuff. Over the course of that time, I think really, Colin really emerged as one of, if not the, real thought leaders in the world in the space of online dispute resolution. He's got some co-conspirators out there, professors that he worked with at UMass Amherst and whatnot, but Colin is really recognized around the world as the leader in this space. After when he just decided he'd had enough of eBay and PayPal, made an exit deal where he got to build the bigger, fancier platform that he had developed with them and created his own company, Modria. And after a while, that got bought out. That got bought out by some other bigger corporate conglomerate called Tyler Technologies. And then Colin just, and I'm going to ask folks who please mute yourselves. Actually, maybe I can I can mute everybody. There we go. And then just not too long ago, sometime in the last year or something, right? You left Tyler and took over as CEO of Mediate.com, which is has been around for quite a while now. It's a great central hub for people in this business. It's a place to find a mediator. It's a place to get yourself listed as a mediator. It's a place to find trainings and learning materials and join a community and discuss things. So it's a really cool platform that provides a lot of service to a lot of folks. So if you look at the bio on the flyer, you'll see all sorts of other things that Colin has done and positions that he's had, and it still won't come close. But that's enough for right now. I'm going to stop eating up time and turn things over to Colin. I will let you folks all know that we will keep with our tradition. We will end promptly at 10 to 7 at 6:50 here on the East Coast, so that those of you who have a class at 7 will have a chance to take a little break before the next before your next class. So, Colin, take it away.
Evan, thank you so much. That was such a lovely introduction. I really appreciate it. And hi, everyone. It's so great to see all your smiling faces. The only thing that would be better if I was back in Boston and we could all go out and get a lobster roll together or something like that. But I guess this is the best that we can do these days in the midst of the pandemic. But it's wonderful to see all of you. That was a very, as you might imagine, very kind, overly charitable introduction from Evan. But everything that I've done in the field, I feel I owe to UMass Boston and the great classes I took there and the inspiration I received there, and Evan's class and David's class, and just Susan and Brad, and just I have wonderful professors, wonderful colleagues. I'm still in touch with a lot of my UMass Boston friends who've gone on and done amazing things around the world. So I feel a real warmth and connection to the community. So it's delightful for me to be chatting with all of you and get a chance to talk about everything that's going on in ODR. There's so much that's happening. I could fill up hours and hours, but I know we don't have hours and hours to fill up. I want to make this as participatory as possible. Obviously, Zoom is only, there's only so much Zoom you can watch before your brain absolutely turns to pudding. I do have some slides, but I've got some exercises and things I want to discuss. I would love, to be selfish, I'd love to just go around and meet each of you and ask you about what are you interested in. That was one of the best things that I found about UMass Boston. Every one of my fellow students, they had their own expertise, they had their own focus area. I had colleagues. It was Bella Bayo was in the program with me, who was a very senior government official in the Philippines. There was a woman in my program who did disputes for Northwest Airlines in the baggage claim. There was another person who did interfaith disputes, in church communities and temples. And so Deborah, another good friend of mine, went off to work at the United Nations as resolving workplace disputes. So I have such a warm feeling towards UMass Boston. I'm sure all of you have similar types of expertise and things you could talk about. But what I'd like to do is just dive in and talk a little bit. I actually am one of the few people who urges you to open up a web browser and just start exploring all of the different URLs and domains and everything that I'm going to start putting out there because, oh, Sandra, wow, you've got a fuzzy friend there. My dog may appear soon. Oh, is that a cat or a dog? I can't even tell. Fred, my dog, may be here at some moment too, so we'll see. Maybe he'll make an appearance. But I want you to play with these tools. I want you to experiment with them. One of the good things about online dispute resolution is we're doing it right now. This is what the future of dispute resolution looks like. I actually had an opportunity to meet with the team that started Zoom. They were right across from my office in downtown San Jose. And they were just getting going. And I thought, why would you start a video conferencing company? It was such a saturated space with WebEx and with GoToMeeting and with all these Skype. But I chatted with them and I said, look, I do online dispute resolution. There are some features you might want to add into your platform that might be useful one day. And one of the things that I told them about was breakout rooms. Now, they were already thinking about doing breakout rooms, but I gave them some suggestions about how it could work. Little did we realize that umpteen years later, the pandemic would hit and Zoom would become the new telephone call. They say, you've made it in Silicon Valley when the name of your company becomes a verb. So now everybody's like, why don't we just Zoom? So, it's like, wow, those guys, I'm sure they don't remember me at all. They're all worth $1 billion now. But it is amazing to think. I have a friend who says I'm kind of like the dog that caught the car. Back when I was taking classes with Evan and Dave at UMass Boston, I would talk about, well, we could use technology. We could resolve disputes over the internet. Little did I realize that there was going to be a pandemic that was just going to force the entire field online in a matter of weeks. So, people say to me, wow, you had such foresight to know that this was coming. I had no idea this was coming. I had a sense that this stuff was going to be meaningful, but I had no idea that the pandemic was going to hit. So what I'd like to do, I demand royalties for breakout rooms. 1 penny for every breakout room it convened. That's what Zoom should be paying me. Then I'd have my own private island. So let me start my slides, and I urge you to post in the chat or unmute and ask a question. Again, I'm going to try and make it as I'll do a couple slides and then open up and see if anybody has any comments or questions. But unfortunately, my slides are a bit of a crutch here. So can somebody give me a nod if you see a slide that says online dispute resolution state of the art? Okay, great. I see a couple thumbs up. So let me just whip through a couple. Some of this is not going to be controversial at all. And I don't even need to go into this with all of you to know that society is digitizing. You know, the broadband internet, mobile devices. Again, when I think back to when I was at UMB, we didn't have Facebook. We didn't have iPhones. We didn't have any of that stuff. And it was just a notion of, and even video conferencing back then was like a little tiny grainy postage stamp. You know, the notion, I remember the first time I ever saw a Wi-Fi. You know, it was when I had my office in Cambridge, and I, you know, had a PCMCIA card that you plugged into your laptop. Laptops weighed like 30 pounds. And I remember wirelessly accessing the internet. I was like, oh my God, okay, this is going to change everything. I remember the first time I saw an LCD projector. I'm like, whoa, think about what this can mean for dispute resolution. So it's just amazing when you think about what's happened in the last 20 years, how much technology has advanced. And now we just take it for granted that all these things is just normal. But the question is, what's coming in the next 20 years? And we're going to talk about that a little bit. There is some amazing stuff that's coming around the corner. And it even with all of the revolutionary things that have happened in online dispute resolution, just wait until you see what's happening. But the point that I want to make is the dispute resolution field, and I would say this is true of the judicial system more broadly. You know, if you're not online, you're increasingly out of sync with where society is going. You know, the joke is, you know, the younger generation, millennials, if it's not an app, they're not going to do it. If you say to them you have to drive down and stand in line or sit on a wooden bench and wait for your file to be called, they're like, okay, I'm out. What is this, 1986? Like, they're not going to fill out a paper form. Those days are gone. So we need to be able to figure out how do we, if we're supposed to meet our parties where they are, if we're going to help them get a resolution to their disputes, and they're moving their whole lives online, aren't we going to need to figure out how to deliver services online in a meaningful way as well? And that's kind of what ODR is all about. Now, so this was the initial definition of ODR. This is what we coined back when I was at UMass Boston. The real father of online dispute resolution is a guy named Ethan Katch, and he was a professor at UMass Amherst. And he started the Center for Information Technology and Dispute Resolution. And when I was studying at UMass Boston, I met Ethan, and he got me involved with CITDR. And we actually came up with this term, online dispute resolution. And we said it's just ADR plus technology. Now, this whole notion of dispute resolution, obviously people now talk about conflict management. So it's not just about resolving disputes, it's about preventing disputes, it's about managing disputes. And conflicts is, like kind of a broader concept than just a two-party dispute. Now, I will say the National Center for State Courts has really taken on ODR in earnest, and they're pushing ODR very hard, but they're pushing an alternative definition that I think fits better with their sense of court technology. So they define ODR as a public-facing digital space in which parties can convene to resolve their dispute or case. Now, I think this is one aspect of ODR. When you create these online collaborative workspaces where parties can come together and work out an agreement through mutual agreement, or maybe even through an evaluative process. But this doesn't really account for some of the algorithmic things that are going on in the field that we'll talk about. But I think that the original definition of ODR, which is just ADR plus technology, I think that definition is a little long in the tooth. And we need to start to get more specific because there's so much ODR breaking out all over the place. But the point that I would make to you is ODR is ADR. And I used to say at ADR conferences, like the dispute resolution section of the ABA, I would say ODR is the future of ADR. And people would roll their eyes and they'd be like, yeah, nerd. Of course you'd say that because I love technology. So that's very self-interested. But there was a reason why we named the field ODR, is we wanted to emphasize its connection to ADR. And one of the things we say about ODR is there's no A in ODR. A used to stand for alternative dispute resolution. But in many circumstances, ODR is not an alternative. It's really the only option. If you're thinking particularly about high volume, low value, cross-border cases where jurisdiction is confused, the kinds of cases we wrestled with at eBay, there is no ADR that really works face-to-face. You just can't do it. You can't have human-powered services when you've got 60 million disputes in 16 different languages and the average transaction value is $75. So ODR is increasingly becoming the new default. And that's exciting, but it's also unnerving. And we'll talk about some of that. Now, again, you've all seen this. I'm not going to go into it. I think I stole this off the JAMS website. You know, this is the resolution matrix, going from negotiation to facilitative to evaluative mediation to MEDARB, and then up the evaluative side. So when we do dispute systems design, and that's an increasingly common class that's taught all over the place. My good friend Jan Martinez at the Gould Center at Stanford just wrote a great book on dispute systems design. This is the palette we paint from. right? When we're talking about fitting the forum to the fuss, we're thinking, well, should this be an evaluative process? Should this be a facilitative process? Or maybe we use both in different stages. But how much outcome control should the parties have? How much process control should the parties have? So every time we do a dispute systems design exercise, we think through this palette. But online, we actually have a lot more control. We can not only decide, are we going to use a facilitative or an evaluative process? We can say, how are the parties going to interact with each other? You know, can they handle a video conference? Or are they so mad at each other it's going to go sideways? Should we communicate textually first? Should we do an audio conference? Should we start out with a video conference, build some rapport, and then move asynchronous so we can communicate via email? Maybe there's workbooks that we can complete. Maybe there's spreadsheets that we can fill out. And then when we reconvene on a video, we've made a lot of progress. And then we can use an algorithmic tool to kind of streamline the resolution process and sort of ensure that things don't get, you know, run off the rails into sand traps. So when we design these online systems, you know, one of the things that Larry Lessig, who's a professor out here at the Center for Internet and Society at Stanford for a long time, but I think now he's back in DC, he said, in the future, code is the law. So it's not about we write the laws and we put them in books and we put them on the shelves of the law firms. We actually write software programs, and those software programs actually regulate all of the behavior within the environments they create. And that's why the dispute systems design people love ODR, because you can take a dispute systems design and you can use code, you can build the process, and then the parties operate within that process. So a lot of the stuff we do in ODR is just like the stuff we do face-to-face. As Evan mentioned, the first company I ever started was called Online Resolution, and I started it in '99 in Cambridge. I was originally trained by the Quakers when I was in undergrad, so they taught me a model of mediation. My first website, Online Mediation, I just copied exactly that process. Unassisted storytelling, assisted storytelling, joint problem solving. It was exactly the face-to-face process just put into code. And very quickly, we realized, well, that doesn't exactly work. There are some things you have to do a little bit differently online than you do face-to-face. But we started to realize, wait, there's also new things you can do online. When technology can come in and help the process, open up new possibilities, enable crowdsourcing or user-generated processes. So you don't have to only have 2 parties and a mediator. You could have, you know, a jury of 1,000 people deciding a case over $100. Software gives you the scale to be able to do that. So the first article I wrote on Mediate.com, I actually was general manager of Mediate.com back in 1999. The first article I wrote was called New Mediator Capabilities in Online Dispute Resolution. And I think there's a lot of ways that technology can make mediation more effective. But one of the things I'm very excited about, which we don't really have in the face-to-face field, and I remember when I was doing my court-connected mediations in Quincy with Dina Beach Lynch, you know, the cases that I would get, the parties were already at impasse. They'd already been negotiating and they were frustrated. And that's why they ended up in small claims court. And then the magistrate would say, here, go with this nerdy guy and, you know, go find a closet. And then we would sit down and try and work it out. I'm coming into that dispute in the middle of the dispute. I don't know anything about it. You know, like, okay, well, tell me what's going on. You know, I'm tabula rasa. But the thing is, ODR gets access to these disputes much, much earlier in their life cycle. You can even talk to a complainant before they even notify the respondent they have an issue. So there's a little bit of theory in the field about pre-negotiation, but I think problem diagnosis is a whole new avenue for us to be able to think about how we set expectations for the parties, how we expand the ZOPA, how we educate people about what a mutually acceptable resolution might look like. Sometimes you can even resolve a dispute in the problem diagnosis phase before they even notify the respondent. So we'll talk about all of these different components. There's nothing here that's new because you've learned about all of these components in your studies at UMass Boston. But I think there are some wrinkles that technology brings into it that makes them more interesting. So let me just talk a little bit about eBay and PayPal, and then I'll stop and see if people have any comments or questions about what I've said so far. You know, as Evan said, I got a call one day in my office in Cambridge, and it was from a senior vice president at eBay. They had read my book, which was ODR for business, and they said, we want you to come out. So they flew me out and I met all these people at eBay and PayPal, and I consulted and I said, okay, thanks a lot. All right, bye. And because I was running a company in Cambridge, I flew home. And 2 weeks later, they called me and said, okay, we've decided we need you and we want you to fly out again. And I went out there and I said, look, I'm sorry, I'm running a company. I can't leave. And then they said, here's how much we want to pay you. And I said, oh, I guess I work for eBay now. So that was what brought me out to Silicon Valley. And it was a real education because eBay was moving at 1,000 miles per hour. This was in 2003. And they were solving a lot of problems for the first time. Now, a lot of the stuff that eBay and PayPal built You now see that's what Uber uses. That's what Airbnb uses. That's what Amazon uses. But at the time, eBay was really the only game in town for e-commerce. So what we built was something called the Resolution Center. And it's essentially a console that every user on eBay and PayPal have access to. And if they ever have a problem, they can come in and report the problem. And then they get tracked through a process to resolve that issue. And you know, most people think about buyer initiated issues like, okay, well, I bought my item and it never showed up. Or I bought my item and it showed up and I'm not happy with it. And that's true. We did a lot of those, but we also had issues around payment. We had issues around kind of like defamation, where someone would leave reputation information for their transaction partner that wasn't true. We had issues where someone would steal intellectual property from someone else. We had a lot of different issues. But eventually, if you counted all of those up, by the time I left in 2011, we were doing about 60 million disputes per year, which is more than the US civil court system. And that was in 16 different languages all over the world. And 50% of those cases were resolved amicably, meaning the software helped the parties come to an agreement by mutual agreement. And 90% of those cases we resolved without a human touching the case. So it's just party A and party B and the software. And they got a resolution themselves, because we only had 25,000 employees. So there was just no way we could manually work all those cases. People talk a lot about pre-dispute binding arbitration clauses. And I did a book for the ABA a couple of years ago that was talking about ODR and the future of consumer protection. I am not a fan of these pre-dispute binding arbitration clauses. I think they're really a perversion of a lot of what we do in the dispute resolution field. And that's not the way these cases are. Now, eBay and PayPal do have pre-dispute binding arbitration clauses, but that's only if you sue eBay. These were disputes between users. So the point of eBay is eBay doesn't hold any inventory at all. It's just a big bulletin board that connects buyers and sellers. So all of the cases I was resolving were disputes between eBay users. And that was one of the reasons why I was comfortable working at eBay, because eBay didn't have a stake in the outcome. They weren't biased towards the buyer or the seller. They wanted to provide a fast and fair resolution process to kind of grease the skids in the marketplace, to encourage people to continue to buy things on eBay. Whereas if you're at Amazon and Amazon is selling the item to the buyer, well, Amazon's a party. So, you know, are you comfortable going to Amazon court if Amazon is designing the court, if they're going to be in the court? So that's another question is, are we okay with these large internet intermediaries building their own resolution systems? So we'll talk about that. But in my process, none of these things were binding. Anybody could have appealed these outcomes in a court. But as I said, we're talking about $75 value, transaction values on average. So, you know, there was 99.999% of these cases never made it to a court. But we did do lots of studies that showed that when someone went through this resolution process, they increased their activity on eBay and PayPal at a much faster rate than someone that never had a dispute in the first place. And because we had these almost billions of records to look at, we could establish that mathematically to a very, very high level of confidence. So I've shared a lot of that data through articles that I've written. We can revisit that. But I don't want to just talk about e-commerce. I think e-commerce is interesting. And obviously, there's a lot of websites that have built resolution centers, as I mentioned. Airbnb, it's not buyer-seller disputes, it's host and guest disputes. On Lyft, it's not buyer-seller disputes, it's rider-passenger disputes. But all of these websites that are not selling tangible items, I mean, anybody selling tangible items, they need something like what eBay had. Excuse me. But if you're selling a service, it's a little bit different. You can't return a service. You know, if I stay in your house and I didn't like it and I want my money back, well, you know, I can't return my stay. So it's a little bit trickier to resolve those cases. But essentially what all of these e-commerce companies realized they needed was fast and fair resolutions, what they called within trust and safety, to encourage people to want to engage in future transactions. Because they know that if your users are not confident that they're going to be able to get a good resolution, they're going to be reluctant to engage in transactions on your platform. But when I spun out this technology, the Resolution Center from eBay, and started Modria, we started applying it in other areas. So one of the things we got into was insurance. And we built the system that runs the largest case volume for the American Arbitration Association, which is medical insurance reimbursement cases in the wake of motor vehicle accidents. And that's in New York State. So that's, you know, a couple 100,000 disputes a year. Not as many as eBay, but, and then product liability. So people that take a drug and maybe they have an adverse reaction, they can go to the pharmaceutical company and work out a resolution to get all their bills repaid and find another medication. Another huge area for us ended up being property tax assessment appeals. So when somebody gets the assessed value of their house and they think the assessed value is too high, they have a legal right to go through a negotiation with their property tax assessor. So that turned out to be a big niche for us. So it turns out lots of places need resolution centers, but eventually we got kind of sucked into the courts. because, you know, it's like the criminal that says, what, you know, they ask, why do you rob banks? It's like, well, that's where the money is. And in our society, that's where the disputes are. So I never wanted to sell to the courts. I'll be honest with you. I'm a true dispute resolution guy. Like, I'm an alternative to the courts. But you know, I wanted to buy bulletin boards outside of the courthouses. And this is based somewhat on my experience in Quincy, by the way. But I wanted to buy bulletin boards outside the courthouses that said, don't go in there. You know, come to Modria. We'll take care of you. Faster, fairer, cheaper, just as enforceable. But then my company, Modria, got acquired by this company, Tyler, which is the #1 provider of court tech in the US. So now I've learned a lot about the courts. So let me actually, I mean, I'll just do 2 more slides. This just shows you what's happened in the courts. In the last 2 years, there's been more than 60 courts that have launched ODR. And I would argue that within the next 2 years, 50% of courts in the United States are going to integrate ODR into their, mostly their low dollar value civil cases. So we're talking about debt collection, eviction, small claims, family court. Some of these places are building their own software. Some of them are using my platform, Modria. Some of them are using another platform called Matterhorn. But it's amazing how quickly this is happening. And okay, let's see. Can you hear me now? Okay, good, good. And I told you I was going to stop and take questions, but you can see I can go on and on here. But there's a lot that's happening, and I'm going to share all these slides so you can click through and take a look. You know, there's interesting things that are happening in Massachusetts, definitely, but there's statewide systems being built in New Mexico. We just launched my platform, Modria, in Los Angeles, which is the largest court district in the United States. So it's very, very interesting to see how quickly things are moving there. But again, ODR works very differently inside the court than it works outside the court as sort of a court diversion mechanism. And this here shows some of the initiatives, some of the organizations that are pushing ODR as a way to expand access to justice. As I said, the Pew Charitable Trust has invested $250 million to promote the expansion of online dispute resolution within the courts. The National Center for State Courts has issued a bunch of white papers sort of detailing best practices for how to leverage ODR in the courts. And the ABA has a big task force on ODR as well. So, and the pandemic has only accelerated this. I mean, I used to meet judges who would say, over my dead body, I'm never gonna work online. And now they come back and they say, okay, well, how do I get my background to, you know, have my, you know, look like a courtroom? So, you know, the pandemic has changed a lot of minds very quickly. So this is the last slide, and then I'm gonna open it up and see what people think. We have a lot of international folks on the call. You know, actually, Shino, there's so much that's happening in Japan right now. It's amazing. You know, Japan has been actually, the judicial system is so efficient there that I think there hasn't been much call for ODR. But now we're seeing a lot of forward progress. I know, you know, we've got people from all over the world on the call. You know, Canada has played the lead. They have something called the Civil Resolution Tribunal, which is an all online court for civil cases. They use ODR to resolve cases. The UK is now launching Her Majesty's Online Court. The European Union has passed an ODR regulation that requires that all consumers have access to ODR in cross-border transactions. And the UN is pushing it. The International Standards Organization is pushing it. APEC, which is the treaty organization for all the countries that ring the Pacific, they're promoting ODR for small and medium-sized business disputes. So, and India recently announced that they're going to digitize all their payments. They're going to get rid of their paper currency, and they're going to mandate that all digital payments providers offer ODR. So, I mean, you're talking about more than 1 billion people. Every transaction that they make is going to be eligible for ODR. So that's what I mean when people joke with me that I'm kind of like the dog that caught the car. It's like, wow, okay, now this is happening at scale. And people are coming to me and saying, well, you know, how do we build this right? It's like, wow, I don't know. Okay, let's figure it out together. But it's very exciting to see the forward progress and to see that all of these different experiments are emerging and they look differently. You know, in China, they've launched these China's launched the internet courts, and they're investing hundreds of millions of dollars in building these very, very high-tech courts. But to me, I think the court of the future looks like this. I don't know if you can see it. This is the court of the future. No more court buildings, no more judges in robes. It's going to be through the phone. The courts are not a place. The courts are a service. And I think that the future of justice is going to look a lot more like dispute resolution than it does the traditional legal model. Okay, so I told you I was going to take some questions. So let me just stop there. That's kind of a survey of everything that's going on around the world. So tell me what you think. about this. Has anybody had an experience resolving a dispute with a big e-commerce company? Have you had any experience using technology and some of the dispute resolution work that you're doing? Let me know your thoughts and reactions to what I've said so far.
And Colin, let me just flag for you that there is a question already in the chat from Lexi.
Please. Let's see, what is it?
Lexi's asking, have you run into any situations where the online tech or tech problems escalates the dispute?
Absolutely.
And Lexi works in tech and can envision this being a part of the dispute.
Lexi, tell me, what do you do in tech?
I work in software development and I'm on the QA team.
Oh boy. Yeah,
So I think
QA.
a whole lot about software bugs and how they can make people upset.
Absolutely. Trust me. Software bugs drive me. That's like the bane of my existence. That's all I do all day is squash bugs. So you're absolutely right. And actually, I've got some ethical scenarios that I'd like to talk through with you if we have time. That's kind of the next thing I want to get into, some of which have to do with scenarios where technology makes it worse. I mean, you can imagine one of the things we do as dispute resolvers, we try to create a level playing field. You know, we try and counteract some of the power imbalances between the parties. Kelly, I think you got somebody behind you, giving you some bunny ears. I love it. So you can imagine a situation where, you know, maybe it's a divorce situation and, you know, one of the spouses is super high tech and wired and they work in tech and they type 100 words a minute and the other person just has a phone, you know, and they, you know, they can't really type that fast. And if you rely on technology, you may be reinforcing power differentials between those parties. And so I'm going to put you into some scenarios where you've got to make some tough calls. Oftentimes the party, what I find is mediators are often not the ones that are like, yeah, let's try all this sexy technology. It's usually the parties that say, why can't we do this online? Why can't we do a Zoom? Why can't we just email this? Why can't we just, so, you know, if you as a mediator are like, okay, we'll do it that way. Sometimes parties will suggest technology that helps to reinforce some of those power differentials as well. So it's a double-edged sword. I mean, I have a bunch of slides on advantages and disadvantages of ODR, but sometimes it can help you level the playing field to use technology, but other times it can exacerbate some of those issues. So Lexi, I think you're 100% right. Ethan Katz, who I said is the father of ODR, he did a presentation one time when I first met him, and he said, the power of technology to resolve disputes is dwarfed by the power of technology to generate new disputes. And I completely agree with that. If we look at what's happened in our society, you know, technology has massively increased the amount of disputes that we have. So, you know, it's almost an arms race between the people that are using these technology tools to foment misunderstanding and foment conflict versus those of us who are trying to use it to build understanding and resolve disputes. And so far, the conflict exacerbators are winning. That's my opinion.
Thank you.
Yeah, please. Lexi, you're fighting. I love QA engineers. Thank you so much for the work you do. I don't even know what product you're working on, but it's a thankless job. But
Well, I love it, but your response makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you.
You bet. Any other thoughts, reactions?
Well, Colin, I have a question that's sort of
Please.
spurred by what you were just talking about. And maybe it's a little bit of a shift, but conflict spurred by technology, but I'm also thinking about the way in which conflict really at a global scale, societal level, is being spurred so much on online platforms.
Absolutely.
And I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Do I have thoughts? All right, here we go. Let me pull out my book where, yeah, I mean, again, I've spent a lot of time, I have a lot of friends at Facebook, and I know I was involved with Facebook from the earliest days when they were on university in Palo Alto. They only had 60 employees there. And I went over and I met with the team and I said to them, look, you are now going to be, there's going to be so many people that are going to be engaging in disputes on your platform. You need to think about the fact that your platform can be an engine for exacerbating those issues. And you have to design things in such a way that it promotes empathy and understanding. And I made a bunch of suggestions to them about how they do that. And they intentionally ignored those things because what they found was you get a lot more engagement from conflict than you do from peacemaking. People like to fight. And so Facebook has been designed as a conflict engine. And I know Peter Thiel, he was one of the founders of PayPal. And I met him several times. We've had discussions. You know, he's kind of a weird guy, but I think he really he enjoys the conflict. Like, I think there's an element. He was the first investor in Facebook, so he's made billions of dollars alongside Mark Zuckerberg. And they have made choices that make the platform sticky, very sticky. And the whole thing is driven by algorithms. So the algorithms want to feed you content that makes you come back. It increases your engagement. And what they found is that fighting is some of the stickiest kind of engagement. And the way they've designed it is, again, it doesn't take a lot of dispute resolution knowledge to know having two people fight about Israel and Palestine, literally in a theater where all of their friends are watching the argument. That's not a good recipe for people to, really communicate with each other and come to understanding, because you don't want to back down when you've got all of your side behind you kind of watching you. So and they have intentionally shortened the communication on the platform to make it very snippy, to make it very short bites. So it's more like SMS. So I've met with them, every 2 years they have me over there and I do a big session for all of their product designers. And I say, look, these are the kinds of design choices you need to make in order to counter some of these trends. And they say, thank you so much. This was really interesting. And then they never call me again and they ignore me because their incentives are misplaced. So, there's a lot of people that are now talking, the tech lash is in full swing. And part of it is because of that. We have optimized based on clicks and dollars as opposed to social benefit and social good. And I'm enough of an idealist to think maybe we're going to start to get it right. We're going to learn our lessons, but I don't know. We'll see. So, Eben, what do you think about that response?
Yeah, so it definitely sort of lines up with what I'm seeing without having known that, the tech end of it and the design end of it was specifically designed to fuel that. But it definitely is looking to me like a major driver of some of the really deep social problems that we've got and that are only accelerating.
Please.
The disheartening thing about what you're saying is that you keep going back there year after year and giving them more ideas about how to make it worse because they just have to do the opposite of what you're suggesting.
Sure.
No, but seriously, if we are dependent, are we dependent on Facebook and Twitter to want to redesign to promote peace building rather than exacerbate destructive conflict? Or are there other things that we, either as citizens or as people who can drive our government, are there things that we can do to force those changes?
Well, that's another very rich discussion. I personally, I think Facebook knows this is coming. I think the government needs to get involved. I think we need to break up these companies. We need to regulate these companies. We can't just let them run willy-nilly. Let me make another point. These are my friends who work at these companies, Twitter and Facebook and Amazon and Google, and none of them want to create conflict. None of them want to create misunderstanding. But what they do is they create algorithms. And the algorithms create incentives. And this is what I'm going to talk about when we get to artificial intelligence and machine learning. If you give a machine, an algorithm, an objective, it will then go out and it will try a million different things to see what best achieves that objective. And then when it finds what achieves the objective best, it will double down on that. So essentially what these algorithms are meant to do is to get more clicks, to get more engagement, because that means they can sell more ads and they can make more money. So if you talk to the people of these companies, I think their hearts are actually in the right place. Many of the employees, yes, social dilemma, Kelly makes a great point about that. So it does a great job explaining that. And they use this metaphor of a guy in a control room. Like, what content do I need to feed this user to keep them engaged, to keep them focused on the platform? And that content may make them sad, it may make them envious, it may make them angry, but those emotions are far better at getting the engagement that the platform is optimized to achieve than other things, which might promote empathy or understanding or connection or happiness. So, if somebody's contented, they don't need Facebook. So again, I don't want to be dystopian here. I think there's a lot of risk in where things are going, but I'm enough of a Silicon Valley convert to believe that it's inevitable. I think these trends are only going to grow, that our lives are going to continue to further move online. And what we need to do is we need to civilize cyberspace. And there are ways to do that. Most internet companies, when they first start, they're just sort of a libertarian free-for-all, and there's no protections. It's just everybody, they can be as bad as they want to be because there's no teachers kind of watching recess. But over time, what happens is they start to realize, okay, we have to tackle cyberbullying. And that was something that Facebook got dinged for very early on. And they actually did a really good job. They hired a lot of smart people and they did a good job tackling the problem. They have to tackle child porn. They have to tackle some of the misinformation. But the question is, do you want a bunch of 26-year-olds sitting in cubes out in Silicon Valley to be making these decisions? Or is this something that all of us together, if we're going to be digitizing society, we all need to collaborate and come together and use the best tools that we have to try and tackle these initiatives, as opposed to just giving some product manager who's tackling this challenge for the first time, like, see if you can go try and make this problem slightly better, when they're confronting, you know, a massive wave of pressure to keep the profits rolling in, you know. So again, I don't want to get sucked too far down that rabbit hole, because I have other things I want to talk about. It's a rich topic. But any other comments about that? I do want to revisit it when we get to some of the AI stuff at the end. All right, and we're breaking. Well, I'm getting rubbing. Okay, thank you. Maybe it's my collar. I'll move my mic up. So let me go back to my slides quickly here. I'm going to jump over a lot of things because I'm trying to pour 30 pounds of sugar into a 10-pound bag. So I'm not going to talk about this. I'll share all the slides. You can learn. I've written a lot about sort of what are the building blocks for online dispute resolution. I also am going to just briefly touch on this organization we've created called ICODR, the International Council for Online Dispute Resolution, which is promoting ethical and practice standards in ODR. It's not that hard to imagine someone starting an ODR provider that is actually not advancing the ethical standards that we care about in the field. Maybe they say they're confidential, but they collect information and share it secretly with other parties. Or maybe they're actually not creating a level playing field, even though they say they do, because the participants in these platforms don't really see the machinery behind the experience they're having. So you can imagine that there is potential for abuse in the rollout of these things. So that's what ICODR is devoted to, is promoting these ethical standards. But let me throw out a dilemma here, because I think this will be interesting to see kind of how you all react. This takes me back to my my Brad Honoraff days, talking about ADR ethics. So, and I really want to focus on the technology aspect of this. Okay, so imagine you're mediating a divorce dispute, it's a family dispute, and the couple you're working with is having a very hard time reaching agreement, and it's frustrating you how slowly things are moving. And one night, while you're trying to get them to focus on the issues that need to be resolved, maybe you're working with them on a video conference, maybe it's an asynchronous exchange, but you just absent-mindedly open a browser tab and enter the husband's name into Google, and you discover that he spent time in prison for abusing the children of a girlfriend he had prior to his current wife. Now, you've not heard this. Parties have not said anything to you about it. You've learned about that through Google. Now, it's news to you, but it helps you understand about possibly some of the hesitation the wife has in agreeing to visitation arrangements, because, you know, but you don't know. Does the wife know about it? I mean, they've not shared this with you. You discovered this on your own. So let me put it to all of you. What would you do? What would you do if you discovered this information? What do you think the ethical thing is to do? Don't be scared. There's no wrong answers.
Is there any precedent in this situation for the parties expecting that you would do any sort of like background checks on them or anything like that?
So that's an interesting one. As I've done online mediation trainings, you know, my sister got a divorce recently and she's on the market. She's on Match.com, and she says, I Google stalk everyone. Like, if somebody matches with me, the first thing I do is I go to Google. Can I find them? Are they on Facebook? Are they on LinkedIn? Are they a real person? Like, you know, I want to know everything that I can about them. And I think the expectation is kind of that everyone's doing that to everyone. I don't know if you've watched that BBC show Black Mirror, but there's some truth to it. You know, like, we all are constantly doing background checks on everybody. So I don't think necessarily that the parties would be surprised if they found out that mediators were doing this. But I think that in this circumstance, when you're a mediator and you're trying to deal impartially with the two parties and you discover this piece of information, now, one, you have a reflective challenge. Are you going to be able to serve as a mediator if you know this information and you don't tell the parties that you know it? I don't know. I think that's an interesting question. Now, I will say I have another scenario, which is this exact same thing, but it's between two business partners. And you Google the business partner and you find out he's paid fines because he defrauded a prior business partner. Now, what I've seen is the response from family mediators and the response from facilitative commercial mediators is entirely different. And again, I'll just cut to the quick. The family mediators say to me, I would definitely Google my parties, but not in the middle of the case. I would Google them before I take the case. You know, if a couple comes to me, the first thing I'm going to do is Google the two of them and see what can I find out about them. And if there's something that I'm not comfortable with in their backgrounds, I'll say to them, I'm sorry, my schedule is full. I can't take your case. Now, the facilitator, I mean, the commercial mediators, they say, I never Google my parties. Never. Not at the beginning of the process, not in the middle of the process. Because something like this could happen. And then it compromises your neutrality. So do you say something to the wife? What if the wife's never heard of this before? I mean, it's hard to believe that she wouldn't know that her spouse, you know, she hasn't Googled her spouse, but who knows? Maybe the two of them know and they decided not to tell you because they thought it would make it hard for you to participate as a mediator. But should you come clean and tell them? Well, maybe it would blow up the process and they would say, well, we can't work with you anymore. So again, I'm not saying there's an easy answer here.
Well,
Eben, what do you think?
Well, I'll offer a thought, which is that we do have a standard exception to confidentiality, which is if you learn about, you know, the threat of harm to a minor.
That's true.
Right? Or the past. You learn about harm to a minor or immediate threat of harm to an adult, right? That those are places where you break confidentiality.
That's true.
The fact that this guy has served time for abusing somebody else's kids may or may not mean that these kids are at risk, but that might be considered a sort of a standard on which you would choose to disclose in this case.
Sure. I mean, I think it is a tricky issue. There's no implication, at least not in the scenario, that there is current abuse going on or there's any accusation of that, and that, you know, this person did this in a prior relationship and served their time, and you don't want to presume that that means that they're going to do it again. So I'm just saying this is an example of how my advice to you as a mediator is don't Google your parties in the middle of the dispute. Like it can put you in an untenable situation. And it may be that you take a look in the mirror and you say, you know what, I can't mediate this case anymore. And then you have to exit. Like I'm sorry, I can't mediate in this case anymore. Maybe you don't explain it to the parties, but I need to get you another mediator. You have to make a personal decision about whether or not that's going to be the case. But this is just, I mean, Lexi, you were asking before about, is there a way with the technology? I'll give you one more of these. And again, we could spend the rest of the time easily doing this. Imagine you're mediating let's see, I got a couple of them here. I have a lot of family scenarios. How about this one? This one is good because I think it gets to Lexi's point. You're mediating a divorce and the wife tells you in caucus she's so tight on money she can't afford internet access in her apartment. She says she can use her phone, but soon after the frequency and length of her posts go way down, while the husband keeps uploading more and more spreadsheets and posting messages in every hour. Progress in the case slows to a crawl every day while you wait for the wife to respond and the husband is getting frustrated. So what would you do? So, I mean, this may be literally a scenario where technology is creating an imbalance between the ability of the parties to access the case. And you may have the wife say, no, I can do it over my phone. It's fine. I'm happy to continue doing it this way. But you as a mediator see that imbalance. So what would you do? Anybody want to posit a response?
Could you suggest that she go to the library or someplace that has better access that could be also free so that it doesn't cost her any money? Sure,
that's an easy suggestion to make, but I will say I've used those library computers and it's often tough. You know, you got to sign up and you get a 15-minute window, and it's not, it can be, you know, if you're talking about an emotional divorce situation, do you really want to do that sitting in the library center? I mean, sometimes you can go to a friend's computer. That's another possibility. But, you know, again, I think, there's not a clear answer in this scenario. I think one thing you can say is, you know what, we're going to go do this on the phone. We're not going to be doing text-based. We're not going to be uploading. Like, you know, she has a phone. So if you do everything audio, well, then that can reestablish the technological playing field. It may also be, Nicole, that she has a friend or a family member that has a computer and she can go use that. So there are alternatives, but sometimes the reason why you need to know about ODR rules and ethics is so that you can know when not to use it. And sometimes the parties will be insistent, yes, I want to use technology, and you as the mediator need to draw a line in the sand and say, no, in this case, it's not a good idea. We're going to go this way. Now, if there was no pandemic, maybe you could say, you know what, let's just do this face-to-face. Let's just all hold off. I'm going to shut down this forum. You know, I wish I had time to show you all the ODR tools that we're building, because it's pretty cool the way it works. But one of the things we do is we give mediators the ability to pause online conversations. So you can pause the joint session, you can pause a caucus, but what you could say is, you know what, I'm not sure that the online conversation is serving us. Let me pause this and let's do an audio call tomorrow, or let's get together at my office at 2 p.m. So that's when the time comes for you as the mediator to take your process authority and say, we're going to go this way, even if the parties may disagree. So let me just give you, let's see. I'll give you two more quick ones, and then we can move on because I have a couple things that I want to say before we, and I want there to be more time for Q&A. Imagine you're working with co-parents who've been separated more than a year, and in the caucus space, the wife informs you she started seeing someone new, but she's not yet told the husband. So you note the information, but it was shared in confidentiality, so you promise to keep it quiet. A week later, however, you accidentally post a message intended to be a private message to the wife in the caucus space for the husband, and the message refers to the boyfriend. You realize your mistake when the husband asks what you mean by the post and who the boyfriend is. So what do you do? All right, who wants to tackle this one? This is kind of mean. It's not a class. I'm not grading you. I could cold call someone. Oh, and we got a response in chat. Let's see. Could you say the message wasn't for this case? You could try that. You could try that. You could say, oh, I was talking about something else. I didn't mean to post it in there. I was actually sending a message to my friend. I mean, you could try that. See how it works. So, okay. Someone says, who said, come clean. Meta said, come clean. And Tracy said, the first thing I would do is tell the wife about the error. Now, okay, so first of all, this is a big mistake, right? You've made a mistake. And this can happen face to face, right? Someone can tell you something in confidence in caucus and you can accidentally share it. And then you got to figure out how to deal with it. But this is very common online because you're managing multiple conversations at the same time. One of the things about online mediation is you can have a caucus going with party A and a caucus going with party B and a joint session, and it's all happening at the same time. You don't have to stop the caucus to have a post a message in the joint session. So it can be, unless you're very careful and you've got a platform that helps you keep track of all these different conversations, a mispost like this can be very common. I think you got to come clean. Now, it may blow up the process, right? The husband may be so livid that it just creates enormous anger, and the wife feels like, why did you betray me? And then, so you need to say, look, I did this thing. I'm so sorry. It was my mistake. I can get you a new mediator. I apologize. I think that's the straightforward thing to do. But I think there's also the question of, could you play it off? I mean, do you think it would be ethical to say to the husband, I'm sorry, that was not intended for you. Please forget that I told you that, or you go to the wife and say, look, I'm sorry, I shared this information accidentally, and then deal with that anger. But I think the only way to do it is to be transparent and to then put it in the hands of the parties and say, I'm willing to step down. We can get you a new mediator. It's my apology. My apology is totally my fault. I think that's probably the way to go. Yeah, and Kelly said it's like sending an email to reply all. The one that always gets me is where you forward an email to someone, like they ask a question and they say, hey, can we get this? And then you forward it to someone else, and then you say, hey, can you answer that question? And you forget that all of the prior messages are in that email that you're forwarding. And you talked about lots of other things. And some of that may be sensitive and you don't intend to pass it along, and then that person that receives it. Or someone forwards your email. That's happened to me, where Eben and I are talking back and forth, and we're talking about what a weirdo David is. And then he forgets, and then he forwards that email to David, and then David goes and reads it, and he's mad at me. And I didn't even forward it. It was Eben. So there's lots of different ways that can happen online.
And then Colin tells the story in a public webinar.
That's true too. And then it's recorded, and then it's on the UMass website, and then in 10 years, somebody sees the recording. So there you go. Okay, so this last one, I'm not going to make you respond to it, but this is another example. Imagine you're mediating or you're arbitrating, and you come in and you log into your computer, and it's behaving really weirdly, and then you get notified you got a worm on your computer. And that meant that somebody might have compromised your computer and downloaded all your email or downloaded all your files. Well, you're in the middle of a mediation. What's your obligation? If you run a virus scanner and then it disinfects your computer and gets rid of the worm, well, maybe that confidential information was compromised. And do you have an obligation to disclose that to your parties? And, were they even going to be able to understand what that means? What does that mean you had a worm? What does that mean that someone compromised the data? They may never know. And it might be that no one took that information. But do we have an ethical obligation as dispute resolution service providers to be transparent when something like that occurs? What happens if one of your parties has that? Their computer gets infected with a worm. Do they have an obligation to tell you? And when we're on a video mediation, you know, somebody could be taking screenshots. Somebody could have their phone on record. It could be right next to the speaker. They could be recording all of that. If you send them an email with a settlement document, they could forward that to 20 people and you would never know. So again, we just need to think about this because we're moving the practice of what we do online, and we spend a lot of time thinking about the ethical standards for the work that we do, but there are a lot of ways that technology brings in new ethical dilemmas and new ethical obligations. It makes me nervous when I see mediators using email, using Skype, using Google Docs, and they say, yes, I'm going to protect the confidentiality of your information. None of those channels are confidential. None of them are. So if we're going to live up to our obligations, should we be using tools that we built for dispute resolution that we know abide by our ethical obligations? Or is it okay to just use whatever comes by default, you know, on our laptops when we buy them or on our phone? So anyway, there's a lot there. Any other thoughts or questions about all of that? There's only one last thing I want to talk about before we break, but what do you think about the ethical issues?
Colin, I want to jump up on that question. I'm Jeff Pugh, one of the professors in the
Jeff,
department.
I see you're at Four Seasons too.
And
good for you.
Yes, we keep things classy here at UMass Boston. I'm fascinated by all these scenarios that you're bringing to us, in part because I'm teaching the negotiation course right now, and by necessity, all of the simulations they're doing are online, and so they have confronted a lot of these. In fact, this week they are doing an asynchronous simulation of an international crisis, and we're at message 500 now. So we have had these cases where someone was trying to send a message to their own delegation about, you know, should we attack them or not, and that went publicly to the other side.
It happens all the
there's
time.
Certainly, absolutely. One of the things, though, in the ethical part that you're talking about that really occurs to me is, since confidentiality is such a cornerstone of being an effective dispute resolution person, it seems like one of the ethical problems is transparency about what that means.
Right.
A digital space makes all of our lives more legible, and once that becomes machine readable, that's not in your control anymore necessarily. So
that's right.
Nefarious actors, hackers can get access, publicize it, and that can do real harm. And that harm wouldn't have happened had you not offered this process. I mean, we just had a congressperson resign because, pictures of her were publicized that weren't intended to be public, and that was a harm that was
Think about Jeff Toobin. Yeah, I mean, these things are happening left and right, and these are smart people. It's not dumb people that are making these mistakes. So yeah, I mean, your
is it
point
just
is very well
about
taken.
Transparency that you have to be upfront about what you can promise and what you can't?
Yeah, the number one concern we hear from people in ODR processes is around data protection and data confidentiality. It's interesting too, because we talk about confidentiality in mediation, in dispute resolution, but in Silicon Valley, they talk about privacy and information security, which are related. And then we talk about transparency. So how can you have an ethical standard which is confidentiality and another one which is transparency? Well, usually the confidentiality has to do with my personally identifiable information. Like, I want to know if I submit sensitive information to an ODR process, it's not going to be on Google in 2 weeks, right? So how can I know, how can I have that reassurance? But at the same time, I want to have transparency about the process itself. I don't want to enter an online process that's like a black box. How long is it going to take? What information is going to be requested of me? How binding is it going to be? So what we often say is it's very important for ODR services to have a policy that explains up front, this is the information that we're going to collect, and this is who is going to get access to that information. And it may be that there are some ODR processes that say, we're going to collect all your personal information and we're going to use it to train our algorithms.
And we're going to be transparent with you up front about that. And maybe the process is free because you're paying us with your data. Maybe another provider says, we're going to delete all of the information you submit and we will not share it with anyone. But then you have to pay us $100 because the only way we get paid is if you give us money because we're going to delete all your data. So it's not that every ODR process has to follow the same rules. It's that you have to be transparent about what you're going to do. And then the parties have to understand it so they know what they're getting involved with. And that's a tricky thing too. When I got to eBay, I was a hardcore ADR guy. I mean, my younger son's name is Alexander David Rule for the initials. You know, I'm a serious guy. Like I'm a true believer here. And I went in there and I said, we need to talk about disputes. We need to talk about confidentiality, you know, all the stuff I learned at UMB. And very quickly, I got schooled. You know, one of the things that eBay said is there's no way we're going to be transparent. There's no way we're going to share data about who filed what cases and what outcomes they achieved. That was not on the table with eBay. So they were already stepping back from the transparency that I asked them for. The other thing was my parties wanted to shout about their dispute from the rooftops because the culture at eBay was if somebody treated you badly in a transaction, you put it in the feedback, you shared it, you let everyone know in the discussion forums. So if I insisted on confidentiality in the process, that was counter to the culture of the environment where I was building a dispute resolution process. So norms around privacy, for instance, are really changing. The younger generation has a lot of different attitudes about that versus the older generation. So that's what I'm saying. It's very interesting to go to China and see them building ODR processes, and it's quite a bit different than the ODR processes we're building in the United States. They actually have an upfront evaluative stage, a non-binding evaluation stage. So they don't start with negotiation. They start with somebody coming in and saying, here's the outcome. And 50% of the time, the parties say, okay, that's good enough for me. And then if they say it's not good enough for me, then they start the negotiation. So that's not the way we do it in the States. So I think it's great that there's 1,000 flowers blooming and we're experimenting with all these different approaches. But I think it makes it more complicated for us to set a unified set of ethical standards that govern not only the behavior of mediators and arbitrators in ODR, but also the people who are building the platforms themselves, because they're ethical guidelines for the coders. As Lexi knows well, you can put your values into the code, and even though you're not touching any individual case, your values will shape the overall outcomes that are achieved. So you guys are asking such great questions. Okay, we got about 12 minutes. Let me just make one more point, and then we'll open it up and see what thoughts people have. Because I just feel like it would be irresponsible for me not to touch on this. You know, everybody is talking now about AI. And one of the things we have in online dispute resolution is this notion of the fourth party. So party 1 and party 2 are the disputants. Party 3 is the mediator, the arbitrator. The fourth party is technology. And the fact is we already rely on the fourth party to do a lot of things in ODR today. Intake, payments, administering cases, sending out notifications, managing documents, all of this, scheduling. But what's coming is very interesting because the fourth party is getting smarter all the time. Computer processors double in power every 2 years, and that's been true since the 70s. So we are on the cusp of a real revolution in terms of quantum computing and all of this. So that's why machine learning and artificial intelligence is such a big topic, because it's not where we are today, it's where we're going. So asking an algorithm, what's my case worth? What's my ZOPA? Coaching me in a case, reframing my case, maybe even arguing on my behalf. Maybe I can say to a computer agent, this is what I want, and the agent will go off and negotiate for me. And then enforcing outcomes. This whole notion of a blockchain and smart contracts where we can reach an agreement and it's automatically enforced. So it doesn't matter. It's jurisdiction independent. We're not reliant on the courts. We're not reliant on jails or judges or any of that. It's all happening in the cloud. It's algorithms that are doing it. So in essence, I mean, I'm not going to go through and show you all of the examples here, but there are lots of platforms that are being built that leverage this algorithmic power to help set expectations, for instance, around what a case might be worth or what a resolution should be. You know, maybe you can do the parties like night or day baseball, where they put their final offer on the table and the algorithm then looks at both offers and decides which one is fairer. And maybe that algorithm is going out and reading 10 million cases in 20 different languages and coming back and saying a fair resolution to this case is this. You can also have complex algorithms like smartsettle.com, where the parties come in and they essentially model all of their preferences by doing swaps between different variables in a multivariable negotiation. And then the computer can generate a Pareto optimal outcome that maximizes the value to the two parties. And if the parties could sit at the table and negotiate for a week and they would never get close to this optimized outcome because the computers can get insight that the parties could never get through direct negotiation. So we're seeing a lot of these agent-based sites where you go and you give some information to an algorithm and it goes out and it argues the case on your behalf. And maybe it's arguing against an algorithm on the other side as well. So this whole notion of bot-based dispute resolution is getting a lot of traction. And as algorithms get more powerful, as computer processors get more powerful, the sophistication of these mechanisms, and I'm not going to go through all these examples, but I mean, there's so many ODR systems now for divorce. When I started doing this work, I had a policy, no family disputes. I only wanted to do transactional disputes. Now we have Hello Divorce, we have Bliss Divorce, we have It's Over Easy. There's lots and lots of these sites that are leveraging these same types of tools. So I'll kind of leave it there. I mean, the last thing that I will share, let's see if I can get my computer to work. Well, it's still figuring itself out. I'll just talk to it. Everyone asks me, are you going to build a digital judge? And the answer is no. I am not interested in building a digital judge. I think that the resolution systems of the future, leveraging algorithms, are not going to be like robots. I think on Futurama, they had the robots with the wigs, you know, and the robes up on the podium saying guilty. You know, we're not going to pave the cow paths of the existing legal process. We're going to have some pretty radical new things that are coming out. Crowdsourcing, as I said, smart contracts, blockchain, artificial intelligence. You know, it's not so much about, my grandfather always used to say, don't build your business where the highway is, build your business where the highway is going. And you don't have to look around too hard to realize there's some pretty big changes that are coming down the pike in our society. The courts are not built to innovate. They're a monopoly. Dispute resolution is defined by what it's not. We get to paint from a very broad palette. So that means we can evolve at the speed of the evolution of society. And we can build the new justice system that's going to be able to deliver these fast and fair resolutions that are required. It's just we can't get limited in our thinking. We can't say, well, this is the way it's always worked, and you know it can't work any other way than this. We have to really think outside the box, and that's what's so exciting about ODR is there's just so much that's happening now. So we only have a couple more minutes. Let me see what you think about all of this. I just fire hosed a ton of information at you, but I'm eager to hear what you think about all of this. I'm also especially eager to hear from someone who thinks that this is terrible and we should resist it and we should fight it and this is bad for dispute resolution. If you think that, please speak up.
I can say something.
Isabel, please.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with it because I love technology. Like I am tech savvy, but it seemed like we will not have a job in the future if the pandemic still happened because the technology would take over.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, lawyers in particular are terrified about all of this because they make their money selling their expertise in our chunks. And if technology can come in and do that, potentially for 5 cents, as opposed to them charging $600 for it, they're really worried. I actually think the demand for dispute resolution services is going to be big. Even if technology can play a lot of these roles in helping to structure negotiations, we're still going to need people to come do the human side. The fourth party is not going to replace the third party. The fourth party and the third party are partners. And we need to get very smart about how we leverage the power of technology. But technology is not going to be able to create that empathetic connection, to do active listening, to really let people vent, to help people go through the psychological side of the dispute. You can't just have some algorithm spit out a resolution and people say, okay, all right, I guess my dispute is resolved. So Isabel, I think your point is well taken. If you want to know what's going to happen to the law, look at finance, look at medicine, look at entertainment. Those businesses have been completely restarted and reinvented by technology. That is coming to the justice system. And I think that ODR and dispute resolution, what we do, is going to play a bigger role in the future than what it has in the past. We're not going to be living in the shadow of the law anymore. We're going to be the new default. So.
Oh yeah, I'm fighting for that. You know, I'm going against it. Like I'm an organizer. I'm fighting for justice.
Oh, good. Well, you know, it's funny. Cuomo talks about build back better. I think that this is an opportunity to do that. If we do this right, this is the biggest opportunity to expand access to justice in the last 100 years, maybe the last 300 years. But I think we can see how easily it could go wrong. And these algorithms could automate inequality. We could put bias into the software And then we could have engines that are essentially churning out injustice 24/7, and we don't even have the ability to get upstream enough to know what the engines are even doing. So that's why we need to engage these challenges. We need to be building this technology ourselves to make sure it works in line with our values. So
We have about 5 minutes, and I see that Meta has a hand up, and then Jaffe has put a question in the chat. So Meta?
great. Let's do Meta first.
Sure. This was mostly about sort of, you sort of answered it, Colin, about the fourth party not sort of taking over everything for the third party, because I do worry about some mediations when you're dealing with family mediation, the
Sure.
screening sort of for informed consent, but also potential abuse, and elder mediation and stuff like that. On the other hand, so there needs to be that human touch to really listen for that and cue into that when you do the screening ahead of time, and also during the mediation. But the other hand is that we have been, because of the COVID, there's been, of course, everything moved online because it had to. And we are hearing from a lot of parties that they're saying that, especially in family mediation, that they're actually happy to be not in the same room, that they feel better being in separate rooms, not necessarily because there's abuse, but just because there's that separation.
Sure.
They don't have to face the other party. So there is that, it also, and there's no transportation cost and all of that goes into it. So we can actually schedule much quicker, people can move forward, and they have fewer costs. So there's that give and take, but it's mostly the concern for trying to take away some of those subtleties, that because we're not going to come out and say, yes, he beats me type of
Right,
thing. Often
right.
it's all those subtleties that's part of why the human interaction is so good, and especially also when you're dealing with elders.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think that who is driving the move towards ODR? It's the parties. And you actually see higher satisfaction, self-reported satisfaction from parties in face-to-face processes, but the preference numbers are off the charts for online. And it's exactly why you say less time off of work, more convenience, less time away from family. You know, if you're trying to figure out your visitation schedule, is the best place to do that sitting in judges' chambers on a Wednesday at 1 p.m. across the table from the person you can barely stand to look at? Or is it sitting in bed on a Saturday night at 7 p.m. with a glass of Merlot on the bedside table and your laptop open and your mom on speakerphone? And like, you know, how do we want to do this? Do we want Easter or Christmas? You know, I think that it helps parties be at their best. It keeps them in the environments that they're comfortable in. And that cooling distance we talk about, actually parties appreciate that. And there's plenty of evidence from the pandemic that shows that outcomes, we have about an equivalent success rate with online mediation as we do in face-to-face mediation. So, you know, if you were getting 60% resolution rates before, you can get 60% online as well. So, and I think that's normalized. I think we've normalized online interaction. So even when the pandemic ends and we're all vaccinated, I still think you're going to see 50% of the cases are going to be online for the future because the parties are going to want it.
I agree. Thank you.
And then we had a question in the chat, right?
Yeah, Jaffe's question about, do you see a place for building or repairing relationship in ODR versus in-person dispute resolution?
You know, I'll just tell one last story, and I did put a link in there to Gene Sternlight's excellent article about the psychological needs of disputants in ODR and making sure we don't kind of just put people into little boxes, you know, and say, okay, well, here's your outcome. You know, my younger son, ADR, Alex, I came home one day and his older brother said, you might want to give Alex some space. He broke up with his girlfriend. I was like, what? Alex was 15. He didn't have a girlfriend. He couldn't drive. I knew everywhere he'd been. He'd never been on a date. I said, did you break up with your girlfriend? He said, yeah, I did. I said, wow, well, have you ever been on a date with her? He said, no. I said, do you talk at school? He said, no, that'd be weird. It's like, when do you have a girlfriend? He's like, well, we talk on Skype, you know? And the younger generation, he had his whole relationship on Skype. Like, and I think this is not uncommon for the younger generation. I think that we used to say as older people that online communication was kind of dehumanizing. It was kind of sterile. It was kind of, and now the younger generation doesn't feel that way at all. I think the digital natives that are born into this world, they how do you find your spouse online now? It's all match.com and swiping left and swiping right. I mean, we do intimate communication via technology all the time. We have humanized the technology. So the notion for repairing a relationship, building a relationship, I think that can happen online. I think we're going to see more and more of that. People are going to be very comfortable, particularly the younger generation. People are comfortable with intimate, emotional connection type conversations in a way that the older generation, us who are digital immigrants, we're born into a world where this technology didn't exist. We're never going to have that level of fluency. So I think you're going to see a lot of change over the years in terms of the degree to which we build technology into our most intimate of relationships. So, but we'll see. It sounds creepy now, but in 20 years, you know, we're going to seem like digital Neanderthals. Google's going to give us an antenna we can just screw into our heads. We'll just communicate telepathically. So, all right, I'm at time. I could go on and on. You can probably see, but so any final comments, Evan?
Just, Colin, this was fantastic. I mean, just a whole eye-opening, you know, great, whether it's for different people here, a new introduction to the field or a much deeper thinking about the field, and not just about online dispute resolution, right? It's about the human part of dealing with whether it's mistakes or ethical dilemmas or all of that. You know, this was really, really rich and a lot of fun, a lot of fun. I'm going to invite folks to unmute yourselves, turn on your cameras if you want, and join me in giving Colin a huge thank you. This was really terrific.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Great to see you. Oh, I like the beacons, Savannah. Savannah.
Go Beacon!
Go Beacons, absolutely. Yeah.
There we
Savannah's
go.
got the background. No, thank you so much. And you know, next year let's do it in Boston. We can all get together. But stay well. Thank you for the invitation. Keep up the great work. And let me know if you have any questions or want any introductions in the ODR field. I would love to hear from current students or alums, and happy to open whatever doors I can. So,
You
right.
hear that, folks? He means it. Yeah.
I do mean it.
Great. Thank you so
All right.
much.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank
All right. Stay well. Talk to you soon. Okay.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Thanks a lot, Colin.
Colin, that really was terrific. Terrific.
Oh, thank you for the
And-
invitation, Evan. I appreciate it.
And we answered our question about turnout. It was awesome.
Yeah, I was impressed. That was great. That was
Yeah, yeah.
wonderful. Wonderful. So
Yep,
I
yep.
feel very flattered that everybody showed. So let me know if I can share anything else. I'll send you my slides. I'll send you PDFs so you can share them if anybody wants them.
Fantastic. I'm sure that we are going to be making use of the recording of this too.
Anytime. That's another great thing about online, not only the chat channel, but the recording. I mean, it's amazing. You know, now that you got this content, reuse it all you want. I give you carte blanche to share it. So.